I'm Steve Schliske, your Activities and Programs Chair for the San Francisco chapter of NATIS. And today is the first podcast on production insights. And we're focusing today on the San Francisco Giants and their broadcast during the stay-at-home COVID-19 situation. And I have with me Paul Hodges III, Vice President of Content and Entertainment for the San Francisco Giants, and Marco Nicola, Senior Director of Live Experience and Entertainment. How are you today, Paul?
I'm doing well, Steve. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
And Marco, how's things with you?
Things are good. Glad to be here. It's a beautiful day at Oracle Park, getting ready for a game against the Rockies tonight.
And I wanted to start off just by saying the situation that we're in. What has Major League Baseball said to you, your requirements for actually broadcasting games?
So there was a lot of back and forth in the planning for the season, and with the negotiations between the Players Union and MLB itself, everything kind of came together at the last minute. So by the time the season was greenlit, we had about 30 days before opening day here at the park to get ready, trying to prepare for what the season would look like with no fans. And one of the big mandates that came down from MLB is that they wanted some sort of uniform solution across the league for artificial crowd noise.
The artificial crowd noise, why is that important?
I think it's important on two fronts: the players and the coaches that are on the field actually competing, and then the television and radio audiences that are listening and watching at home, and trying to provide for those players, and our players specifically, some sort of normalcy and sense of home field advantage here at the ballpark. And then for the viewing audience and listening audience at home or in their cars, just trying to give the broadcast a sense of normalcy and make it sound as realistic as possible.
I guess in a player's mindset, they've lived their whole lives as an athlete with crowd noise in that sort of environment. For a viewer at home, you wouldn't think that a player would actually need that because they're professional and so forth. So there is a drop-off in the caliber of play, do you think, if they don't hear that noise?
I'm not sure there's a measurable drop-off, but emotionally, I think they definitely feed off of it. We haven't gotten a ton of feedback on our audio specifically, but we have had coaches reach out throughout the season and tell us that it is making a difference, or if there's a game where there's a little more energy than other games, they definitely reach out to let us know that the guys appreciate it and that it does make a difference for them.
And I think, Steve, I think it's important to remember why we exist in this job is essentially help get that crowd excited to hopefully, again, home field advantage, to spark those home field advantage moments and maybe, drive us to a place where that hit happens because the player got motivated by the crowd noise. So I think someone said right now, without even playing in the crowd noise, it's like you're playing at a high school ballpark, in the sense that, there's no noise. And I think, as you mentioned, these players get to this major league level, this highest plateau, and you feel like you're playing in a high school ballpark. So again, I think the whole spirit of this is to try to give some sort of a competitive psychological home field advantage throughout this.
And Paul, I think you were also mentioning that you're running the scoreboard as if there was a live crowd there as well. That's something fans at home don't see.
Yeah, no, Marco could definitely take this one. But I mean, we have a little bit more of a skeleton crew because there's obviously no fans in the ballpark to entertain, but there's still players to entertain. There's still some sense of normalcy that things are turned on and we're being professional. You got Rennell working in the PA, announcing the games. You got our usual scoreboard crew doing their work. So there's a lot of folks that are still involved in this, despite no fans being in the park.
So you're saying that you're limited by Major League Baseball or by the rules of the state about how many people can actually be in the ballpark working on a game?
So MLB this season has kind of outlined a specific number of people that are allowed to be working in every ballpark, which is a uniform requirement across the league this season. And there is a set number of people that we're allowed as an organization to have in the ballpark. So it was kind of a game of Tetris across the entire organization, figuring out which department got what number of head counts and what was necessary for each of the different departments throughout the organization to keep the ballpark up and running this season. We did end up, I'll just add, our normal crew of maybe 20 to 22 people in the control room is down to 16 people this year. No cameras, no video shaders or anything like that. We're not actually shooting any action. We're just putting up headshots, graphics, keeping what's called our game in progress look, which is the line score and all the stats and things like that for the teams to see as well.
So Marco, all the crowd sounds, can you describe the piece of hardware you use? control the crowd sounds?
Sony and PlayStation, which is a partner of Major League Baseball and also of the Giants as well, came to an agreement where Sony provided a library of artificial crowd noise that's used in MLB The Show, the video game. They have libraries of tens of thousands of different crowd sounds and reactions for every different situation you could think of that happens in a baseball game, every different pitch count to a batter, every different type of fly ball, every sort of situation in a game you can think of, they have a reaction for. And if they were to turn that entire library over to us and an audio operator, it would have been overwhelming for a human to try and trigger these sounds and react to games in real time. So MLB did a really good job of paring that down to a real manageable library that was then loaded onto iPads that were sent out to all 30 clubs with a really easy to use, really intuitive interface for our audio operators to use. And we got those iPads shipped to us maybe 2 weeks before the start of the season. We were able to test a little bit during our training camp that happened with the players here at the ballpark. There's no fake crowd noise operators that are just out there in the marketplace that were looking for work at the time. This is something we kind of had to start from scratch. So our ballpark DJ ended up taking the reins of the crowd iPad. He's a guy who's got a pretty good sense of the crowd and how to read a crowd and what their normal reactions are. And obviously a fairly tech-savvy individual. So he's been tasked this season with being the voice of all the thousands of Giants fans that would normally be here in the ballpark.
We'll put some photographs of the device. You'll see it joining this podcast. When the Dodgers come to town and they come up, do you have boos? Do you have negative crowd reactions?
We have what's called disappointed crowd reactions. That was as far as we were allowed to go this year. And in those planning calls leading up to the start of the season, the topic of boos was definitely a hot button issue and a much requested sound effect from all the clubs to MLB. The sense that MLB kind of came back to us with was 40,000 or 20,000 fans booing organically is one thing, but having that much power in one person's fingertips, and that person being a club employee, didn't seem kosher. So we weren't given any boo effects. So it's been pretty tame on that front, but we definitely have our disappointed reacts, which we can use for opposing players trying to pick off a Giants runner on first base or things of that nature.
So I guess it occurs to me that these sounds that I'm hearing at this Giants game, if I go to Chicago and watch a Chicago game, I might hear the exact same recordings.
The library that was distributed is the exact same, but how teams use it has really become kind of an art form and has been pretty individualized to each club and each operator. So that the way that the libraries are organized, you have the ability to layer different sounds on top of each other. You can edit the clips and crossfade them with other things. And so there's been a lot of creativity. So for example, our neighbors across the bay in Oakland at the A's are famous for their drummers that they have in the bleachers in the outfield. And they've started to record some of those samples as well that they've layered into their crowd beds. So teams are being creative and finding ways to incorporate some of those organic sounds that are distinct to their ballparks into the artificial crowd noise.
But Steve, I think though, if you do watch some of those games, as Marco was saying, the art form, when you're watching on TV, I feel like they did a good job of capturing the noise, because sometimes I get kind of lost, not even realize that there aren't fans at the ballpark. But I think what does it sometimes is maybe a delay between like a play happens, or maybe someone got trigger happy and someone was called safe and all of a sudden they hit the wrong, crowd reacts. Even last night, Austin Slater hit a home run, and Kruko was mentioning during the broadcast that one thing that is missing that's not captured in those crowd noise is that even after a home run like that, because he hit a pretty much a line drive shot that just ran out there, that there's usually this buzz in the ballpark of people just talking about it and like, oh man, I saw that, wow. So you don't really capture any of that with this iPad. And I think there's those moments, those organic moments of just when things get elevated and that ground level starts to kind of like swell just because of pretty big opportunities. But I think that's the part, the actual human piece that's missing. But as Marco was saying, the art form, it's kind of funny. You could probably watch a bunch of different games and kind of have a favorite, so to speak, of whoever's running the stuff behind the scenes.
I'd add that the operators that I've spoken to, they equate it to playing a video game with the amount of focus that you have to have. And between inning breaks, they can take a breath and stretch a little bit. But once we get back into game action, they've got to be glued to what's happening, and they can't be away from that iPad for more than a second. Otherwise, they're going to miss that reaction, and it's going to seem super out of place and artificial.
It's really one person that's making a decision for 40,000 people would be in the stands, because the fans all react to each other and there's a communal reaction, whereas you have one person in a booth trying to make 40,000 decisions at once.
That's exactly right.
So recently there was 2 games in San Francisco where San Francisco was not the home team. They were the away team.
The reason, obviously, with the air quality and whatnot, Seattle was getting hit pretty hard with terrible air quality, and MLB made the decision that rather than play those games in Seattle, play them down in San Francisco. Marco had the challenge and team of putting on 2 games where we were essentially the away team.
Yeah, so like Paul said, with the air quality in Seattle, and we obviously in the Bay Area had been dealing with it too, it was kind of hard to believe that we were the safer option for baseball to be played at the time. But we ended up having about 24 hours to scramble. First step was getting our crew alerted to what was happening and letting them know that there was going to be 2 extra games on the schedule with only 24 hours notice. And then, as Paul mentioned, trying to provide, with these being technically Mariners home games, some sort of home field advantage or a sense of home field normalcy for that visiting team. And there aren't really MLB guidelines on how to approach that. But, I think we've got a really good working relationship with our counterparts in Seattle and reached out and started the conversations. And they had kind of prepared a list of asks. And to their credit, they had mentioned that they kind of imagined themselves if the shoe was on the other foot.
Did you also have to provide walk-up music for the opposing team?
So in a short amount of time, we were able to collect a lot of assets from the team up in Seattle, including walk-up music for their entire roster, which is obviously a big part of the baseball experience and pretty important to the players, as well as some video and graphical assets to integrate into our scoreboard show as well.
So at the time of this recording, the Giants are still in the hunt for the playoffs. Anything going to be different during the playoffs?
The biggest difference is we won't be playing at home. MLB is going to be doing this in a bubble. So we are also working on the other side of things of just make sure the travel party and they actually begin their quarantine today from a hotel room just to ensure that as they depart and head off into the playoff land of LA, or I guess it's all in Texas, but wherever it's going to be, that bubble, everyone is pretty much quarantined to protect it so that the virus doesn't get in. But Marco, you're still on talks with MLB because there's still a desire to try to have the Giants are playing in the playoffs, some sense of a home field advantage in this bubble in a park in Arlington.
For the National League, the playoff venues are going to be in Houston and Arlington, and all the playoff games will be hosted there. But there is a desire still from MLB to provide some sort of home field normalcy for whomever the technical home team is for those particular games. So they have created a drive of sorts where we're all starting to dump some of our content for those operators and producers in those parks to have access to. So all of our rally content, music, our batter walk-up music, prompts and chants and things like that, anything that we could think of providing to provide some sort of normalcy for our players when they're in this bubble, we're starting to collect that and ship it off. And it's going to be a tall order for the producers in those host cities that are having to juggle between producing home games for quite a few different teams in their ballparks.
Hey, well, Marco and Paul, thanks for spending time with us. It's been very informative and certainly something that I didn't know about, that I couldn't even imagine all this was going on in the background.
Yeah, pleasure to be here, Steve. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Yeah, next time you guys watch the Giants game, think of Marco and that whole team behind the scenes pressing all those buttons.
Well, good luck to the Giants and good luck to you guys and the rest of the season. I did have one other question, Marco. Does this skill set you're learning prepare you for anything post-COVID?
That's a good question. And I think there's so many question marks beyond the season, like what the new normal is going to look like. The amount of flexibility and adaptation that everybody went through. And I think it's just a testament and definitely a skill set that I think will be useful in the future.
Well, thank you both for your time.
You got
Pleasure.
it.
Yeah, and good luck to you guys the rest of the season, and go Giants.